Okay, so in the last video, I showed you that if we go to API products 1, we do get an error back. It tells us cast to object ID failed, but this is an HTML file, and we don't want that. We want to send back a JSON object with a message, and I'm also going to add the stack trace to it if we're in development mode. So to create a custom error handler, we just have to add some custom middleware. Now, I haven't really gone over what middleware is, so real quick, middleware is it's basically a function that has access to the request response cycle. So when we make a request, we can have a function that can access anything in these objects. And to define middleware, let's just go in server.js. You don't actually have to do this. I'm just showing you as an example. So app.use is where you want to pass your middleware in, and this can be a function that takes in request, response, and then next, because you always have to call next to move to the next piece of middleware, unless you're just stopping the whole request response cycle. So I'm just going to do a console log here of hello, and then after that I'm going to call next to move on to the next piece of middleware. So if I save this and I make any request, like if I go here and make a request to API/products and then look in the console, we're going to see hello. And we have access to anything that's in the request, like we could say request.original URL. So now if I go back to Postman and send that, and I look down here, it shows me the URL, API products. So you can create custom middleware to do a lot of different things. In fact, when we deal with our authentication middleware, we're going to assign the logged in user to rec.user, and then we'll be able to use that in any route that we want. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to create some error middleware down here at the bottom under the routes where we connected these routes. So let's say app.use. Now with error middleware, if you want to overwrite the default error handler, then it's going to be a function that takes in error first and then request response next. Okay, and then in here what I'm going to do is, first of all, we need to figure out the status code. Now sometimes we might get a 200 response even though it's an error, so I'm going to have a conditional here where I say let's look at the res.status code, and if that is equal to 200, then let's make it a 500. So 500 just means it's a server error. It could be a lot of different things, but that's kind of the fallback, the default. And then else, it's going to be whatever the status code is. So res.status code, because when we're inside a route, I want to be able to set a status code before we throw an error, and we can set it to whatever we want, 404 or 401, whatever it might be. Now we want to set res.status to whatever that status code is, and then what I want to respond with is JSON, and I want it to be an object with a message, and that message is going to come from that error object. And now I also want to have the stack trace, but only if we're if we're not in production. So we'll say process.env.node.env. If that is equal to production, then I just want this to be null. Else, then I want to get the stack from that error object, like that. So let's go ahead and save. Now if I go back to this tab where I went product/1 and I initially got this HTML response, if I send it again, wait a minute, status code is not defined. I'm sorry, this shouldn't be error, this should be status code. There we go. Alright, so let's send that, and now we get back, instead of an HTML file, we get back JSON data with the message and also the stack trace, but only if we're not in production. If we're in production, this isn't going to show because there's no reason for it. We only need this in development mode. All right, now I also want to have a fallback for 404 errors, which is a not found. So basically, if you go to anything that's not an actual route, So right above this, let's say app.use and pass in a function with recres next. And in this function, I'm going to define error and set this to a new error. So this is how we can throw an error. And we're going to say not found. And remember, we have access to that request.original URL. I'm going to put that right here. Request.original URL. And then set the status. And the status is going to be set to 404. And then we just want to call next and pass in error. Okay, we'll pass in this error here. So now if I save that, and if we go to something that's not an actual route, like just /API, whatever, test, we're going to get this message not found, and it's going to show us the URL that we're trying to access. Okay, now I don't want to keep this in this server.js because it's kind of messy, so what we'll do is in our back end here, we'll create a middleware folder, and let's create a file called error middleware.js, and let's define not found, and let's define error handler, and then I'm just going to grab from this app.use everything that's in here. We're going to cut that and put that in the not found, and everything that's in here, we're going to cut that and put that in the error handler. And then we just want to export these, so let's say export not found and error handler, and then we're going to bring that file in, or bring those functions in. So import not found and error handler from, and it's going to be, where are we? We want to go /middleware /error, /error middleware.js. And then down here, we'll just pass in not found, and we'll pass in error handler. So save, and we should get the same results. So if I go to something that doesn't exist, we get a not found. If I go to product/1, we get this message here. And we're using the express async handler, so if there's any exceptions, if there's any errors in the catch, then that's going to show here in a message. Now I just want to show you, if we go back to our product routes, here we checked for product, and if it's there, we responded with it. Else we set a 404, and then we set a message back, which is the correct format of what I want to do. However, now that we have this custom error handler, we can simply set the status first. So just set it to whatever we want, and then we can throw a new error and pass in a message. So what is this? Product not found. And we don't even have to add this. If we disregard this, it'll just be a 500 by default, but I want to set it to a 404. So let's save that. And now if we go back, if you recall, what has to happen for this to fire off is it has to be an actual formatted object ID, but just not one that's in the database. So if we go back here, one obviously isn't a formatted object ID, so we're going to get this. However, if I go, let's see, we'll grab this object ID and paste that in. So that's valid, so we're going to get our product. But if I change the 9 to something else and I send, we're going to get a 404, we get message product not found, and we get our stack trace. So this is going through our custom error handler. All right, I'm just going to change that back here and make sure I save this. And now we have our custom error handler. And whenever we want to throw an error with a response, we can simply set the status, which is optional. If we don't, it'll just be 500, and then we can just throw a new error. So we don't have to do the res.json and stuff like that. Okay, and it will all be formatted the same way. So that's it. Now, in the next section, I want to start to get into our front end, and we want to start to get into Redux, because right now we're fetching this stuff from, and actually that's one thing we can test out. Let's just npm run dev, which will run our, both the back end and front end. We should get the products now from the database. Yep, because it's still hitting those routes, and these are coming from the database. However, we're fetching them right from the component, which is not what I want to do. I want to use Redux so that we have our global state where we can get the products and then pass them down. We'll have to create reducers and actions to do that. All right, so in the next section, we're going to get started on Redux and working with our global state.